following is a presentation of the Fellowship Church at Anthem, a community of faith, love, and hope. For more information, please visit fellowshipanthem.com.
How's everybody doing today? Yeah? Welcome back to church. Welcome back to school. It's great to see you guys today. If you're a guest today, we want to say thanks for joining us. My name's Ted, and I'm going to be leading us through a time today of discovery. We are in a series right now. Oh, thank you. Look at that. Wow. Oh, this is so funny. Okay, so we're in a series on vulnerability. Okay? Because what we've come to know in the last couple of weeks is that all of us are hardwired to love and belong. We all want to be loved, we want to feel loved, and we all want a place to belong. We want a place where we can connect, not just fit in, but where we are completely accepted for who we are and what our life's about and all that kind of thing. So this morning, I'm wearing a fellowship t-shirt because we have a few extra for sale today. When I put it on this morning, I noticed there's a big spot right here. And so I put my shirt on this morning, and I'm sort of in a middling generation, right? I'm not quite young enough to be cool and hip, but I'm not old enough to not think I'm not young enough to be cool and hip. So this morning, I reverted in it was kind of a cross-pollination of young and hip and not quite old enough to be not young and hip. So I tucked my shirt in, right? And so I tucked my shirt in, and as I'm coming in today, two of my fashion consultants at Fellowship said to me, "Untuck your shirt," which is great because my wife's not here today. We had a death in the family. She's back in Oklahoma, and so I didn't have somebody checking me before I went out the door. So I had two fashion consultants that said to me, "Hey, untuck your shirt." And so so here I am. I'm in the process of coming up here, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I got to untuck my shirt." So I set my computer down, and I began the process of untucking my shirt. And if some of you were in a moment of connection with God during that song and you heard a loud crash, that was my computer. And it was, concrete floor, right? I mean, it's beautiful and all. But, so it's hard on technology. So when I came up here with my shirt untucked, with my stain on it, and my computer that freshly crashed on the floor, I forgot my coffee. Anybody else having a hard morning? We're talking about love and belonging. Here's the definition that we used last week to kind of talk a little bit about love, because love is such a hard thing to define. It's so squishy. It's so, hey, I love my wife, and hey, I love a burrito. They're just so, what is love? And love is when we cultivate, it's cultivated when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor that spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust and respect and kindness and affection. So love, and this is, again, from some great research from Brené Brown, who's done a lot of research on vulnerability and connection. And what she basically says is that love happens between two people when we open up our lives and we make ourselves vulnerable. And when my vulnerability opened up to you is met by your reciprocal vulnerability that's based on trust, respect, kindness, and affection. And you showed me that this morning. None of you said to me, "Dude, spot on your shirt, you really should go home." Nobody said that, right? A couple of you were like, "I don't know if I would have worn the spotted shirt," but we're just going to call it a design element. Mutual love is about trust, respect, kindness, and affection that comes when I open up a piece of my life and I let you in there. Now, in Brené's research, she found that never, not one single time, was love ever mentioned that belonging was not also mentioned. So love and belonging are friends. They're partners in the same feeling center of our lives. And here's her definition for belonging. It's a real simple one. It's about that innate human desire to be a part of something larger than us. Larger than us. It could be a church, it could be a community, it could be a family, it could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be a career, it could be a cause. Something happens out there that says, I am a part of that, where we are welcomed in and where we give ourselves to it and it gives itself back to us. That's about belonging. And so these two pieces, love and belonging, they really are hardwired into us. They're hardwired. And last week we said that at Fellowship Church, when we started the church almost 12 years ago now, it was like our little tagline, this is your place to belong. Because we wanted anybody, from any background, from any experience of life, from any pain of life, to walk into this place and find not just a place to fit in, but actually a place to belong. Some place where you could feel a part of something larger than you. And what I recognized when we sort of adopted that philosophy was it was kind of against the typical religious institution philosophy. Churches talk about giving you a place where you can be a part. The challenge is they say you can be a part here as long as you look like this, talk like this, act like this, be like this, you can be one of us. And for a lot of religious institutions, they have their dominant sort of mission is about informing us about God or educating us about faith principles or practices. It's about protecting the rules and setting out there the guidelines that are supposed to govern our behavior and all that kind of thing. And what we said is it is that, but it's also about a community of people that will make themselves vulnerable to one another and open themselves up and say, you know what, you can be one of us. You can be one of us. And what's hard about that shift is that we're drawing on thousands of years of religious institution that says you can be one of us, you can belong here as long as, and we just try to say you can be one of us as long as you're breathing, as long as you're broken, as long as you're a sinner, you can be one of us. If you pretend like you're not broken, if you pretend like you're not a sinner, you could still belong here, you just won't stay very long because we're kind of open with our brokenness, right? So when it comes to this idea of creating a place, which is way more than carpet on the floor or bare wood floors or bare concrete floors, it's way more than institution, it's way more than rules, it's way more than dogma or doctrine, it's way more than any of that. It's ultimately woven into the fabric of who we are. It's about connection. It's about a place where I can experience love, both giving and receiving. It's a place where I can experience belonging, both becoming a belonger and feeling like I belong. And that's what we really want fellowship to be, because we believe that's the way God has hardwired us, is for connection. So, last week we introduced a couple barriers to connection, and I want to focus on one of them today because I think this is the biggest barrier to connection. It's a taboo topic in church because, again, the institution has to protect and preserve its image, and part of the image of the institution is that we're all okay, we're all perfect. This is why those outside of the institution of the church often look at us inside the church and go, you guys are a bunch of hypocrites. Because inside the church you talk nice to each other, but on the way out of the parking lot, you were perfectly willing to throw down with somebody because they took your parking space. And I think the world often looks at the church, those outside the church look at us inside the church and go, why don't you guys just stop pretending like you're something that you're not, and just acknowledge that you have brokenness, you have fears, you have doubts, you have sin, you have all those things. And you know what? We just try to do that here. The challenge that we have is we have this thing called shame, which is a taboo topic in the church. We just don't talk about shame. And shame is the disconnector. Shame is that intense feeling that I have that I am unworthy of your love, that I am unworthy to belong here because of something in my story. I feel flawed. I feel small. I feel broken. I feel as though I can just never be good enough, and so consequently I import these feelings of shame into my life that keep me on the periphery. Some of you have been coming here for a long time, but you've never connected because of the risk associated with becoming vulnerable. Our ability to connect in this human experience of life is going to be largely dependent upon our willingness to learn how to recognize shame when it pops up in my attitude or my behavior, to deal with that shame appropriately, and then to move forward through it in courage. So a couple things about shame. First of all, we all have it. Everybody has some point in their life that's attached to shame. All of us have something in us that says, what if everybody knew this about me? Whatever that is, whatever that thing is, whatever that part of your story is, can cause us to shrink back from relationships, disconnect, unbelong ourselves to the place where we're like, you know what? It's just not worth it because I'm not worthy of love and belonging. So we all have shame. All of us have some place in our life, some story, some part of our story that causes us shame. Secondly, we're all afraid to talk about it. Everybody is. All of us are afraid to talk about shame because it makes us vulnerable. I'm going to have to tell you one of the pain points of my life. I'm going to have to open myself up. That makes me vulnerable, and nobody likes that. It's incredibly uncomfortable. It's incredibly risky. Maybe you've even tried being vulnerable in a relationship, and what happened was that other person came against your vulnerability, or they discounted it, or they said, you know what, you're really not worthy of love. And so it causes us to shrink back in fear. The third thing about it is the less we talk about shame, the more control shame has over our lives. And in a community like this, that's sort of built on image and perception, the shame monster can be like a prison for us. We put up all the props on the outside like life is great, and on the inside we're just like crumbling and broken. Have you ever had an experience where maybe you walked into a room and there was people already in the room, and when you walked into the room, the people in the room they just got real quiet, started whispering? All of us have had that at some point, right? Because a couple of you just you slunk down in your chair. I don't even know if slunk is a word, but you slunk down in your chair. Because we've all had that moment where you feel like somebody else knows something about you that you really don't want known, and so consequently they talk about you behind your back, and when you kind of confront their presence, they like, what is that? That's shame. Because shame thrives in secrecy, in judgment, and in silence. As long as I keep this part of my life tucked away, where nobody knows it, nobody can ever find out about it, I'll be okay. Some of us, all of our lives, have been trying to manage that part of our story, and it is so incredibly exhausting. Now, those points when we walk into a room and our story is found out, sometimes it just happens, right? I mean, sometimes we have no control over it. It's just out there, you know. This past week, I have this I have this pair of shorts that I've had for about two years now, and it's a pair of cargo shorts, you know, so they're kind of big and bulky. You can fit a lot of stuff in the pockets and everything. And I don't know why they do this, but they make them look all like industrial and nautical and like, you know, whatever. And so there's hooks and like there's bells and whistles and gauges and everything hanging off of it. And so the zipper has this little like kind of like a canvas flap on the zipper, you know, where you don't have to, when you're zipping it, you don't have to grab the metal part. You can grab like the canvas part, like whoever like zips their, I don't know. But something's wrong with my zipper. And since the moment I bought those shorts, it's been progressively increasing in its ability to go down without my approval. And so now, literally, if I put those shorts on and I walk around for about 10 minutes, my zipper's halfway down. And I can't control it. And so I recognize this week it's past the point of appropriate apparel for public consumption. Because I walked into a room and there was a few people standing around, and I didn't recognize how far down it had crept until one of my friends came over to me in an incredible moment of extreme vulnerability said, "Your zipper's down." I'm like, "Thank you. I know." And then my friend was like, "You know?" Which brings up a whole nother range of issues, right? But there was a moment where my friend's vulnerability with me allowed me to be vulnerable, and it was just one of those odd moments. But what would it be like if every single room we walked into, we could just be open and transparent? We could just be vulnerable. Now, here's the thing about shame. Whatever that thing is inside of us that keeps us in shame, not everybody is worthy to hear that story. You have to be careful with who you share your shame story with. Right? So, I just shared the zipper story with you. This morning, I took measures to combat the zipper. So this pair of jeans has buttons. There'll be no further vulnerability in this time this morning. So, but what would it be like if we could just walk into a room and feel completely accepted just like we are? No shame. Completely vulnerable. Let's talk about shame versus guilt, because I think this is such an important point, especially since we're all sitting in the building of a religious institution. Because there's a massive difference between shame and guilt. And I believe that not only does our culture often mistake the two, but church culture in particular is horrible at this. We are, in the church, we are so good at shaming people into certain forms of behavior. Now, guilt is actually, it's a good emotion. Guilt lets us acknowledge that we've made a mistake, that we've done something wrong, something inappropriate. Shame, on the other hand, says, I am something wrong. So shame says, I'm a bad person. Guilt says, I did a bad thing. Shame says, I am a mistake. Guilt says, I made a mistake. And the reality is all of us are sinners. So we're all going to make mistakes. That doesn't make us a mistake. All of us are going to have things that we do that's inappropriate in our behavior. That does not make us bad people. I have worked with literally thousands and thousands of people over my adult life in ministry, and I've seen the full spectrum of the human component. I've seen stories of pain and shame and grief and all of that, and in all of the thousands and thousands of people that I've worked with, I think I've only met a couple people, only a couple in thousands and thousands of people that I would consider like bad people. Now, there are a lot of people that when I first met them or when they first behaved in a certain way, I said, golly, they're really a bad person. That's not true. They were just acting in a bad way. There's only been a couple people that I've ever met. And as I peeled the layers back on their life, I began to realize that they had such an incredible trauma in their life and such brokenness in their life, or something wasn't right mentally or emotionally that drove them to a place of badness. But inherently, all of us have this stamp of God that says you are good, you are worthy, you are loved, you do belong. And that sense of worthiness should chase away our shame, but oftentimes the shame is so dominant, and particularly in religion. Because in religion, we've come to use shame as this control mechanism to keep people in line so they do what's expected. right? Think about, it depends on how you grew up in your religious tradition, but like where I grew up, sort of in the buckle of the Bible Belt, this was the shame tactic that we used in the buckle of the Bible Belt. If you don't live right, if you don't act right, if you don't talk right, and if you don't get your sins forgiven, you're going to die and go to hell. But God loves you. Is it any wonder we grew up kind of warped? Right? Don't have sex. Don't do anything bad with your body. That's all evil. Don't touch a girl when you're growing up. Don't dance close to a girl. Don't whisper at a girl. But sex is a beautiful thing between a husband and wife. Right? We grew up going, wait a minute, wait, hang on a second. We have all these pieces of life that religion says, hey, shame. Don't do that. We control behavior. We control activity. We control all kinds of overt morality through this shame thing. If you don't do this, God's going to do this. And the reality is that's not the way God operates. Does He place His Spirit in our life to sometimes create guilt so that we know when we step across the line? Absolutely. There's a massive difference between guilt and shame. I can remember, at times there have been people in my life, yours too, that you've heard this phrase come out of their mouth. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself. Man, what happens when you hear that? Right? Oh gosh, I should be ashamed of myself. I'm not a good person. Or I heard this a couple times growing up. You naughty little boy, shame on you. I usually heard that on the way to some corner where I was going to have to sit and put my nose in it for way too long. Shame on you. Let me give you a story about Jesus. This is really interesting, the way He dealt with people's brokenness and their sin in His religious system. So, this story's in John chapter 8, and what happened was Jesus was teaching this group of people. And in Jesus' day of teaching, it would have been a little different than this one, obviously, but what would have happened was He would have been sitting down, and you guys would have all been standing up. And we won't act that out because some of us would be ashamed to do so. But Jesus would be sitting down, and so He's teaching everybody. He's teaching about goodness and grace and mercy. And all of a sudden, in the back, He begins to notice like this crowd of religious leaders gathered. And they were easy to spot because they dressed in such a manner so that everybody knew who they were. They wanted everybody to know how holy, how righteous, how religious, how pious they were, and so they dressed appropriately so everybody knew who they were. So all of a sudden there's 2 of them, then there's 4 of them, then there's 8 of them, and right in the middle of them there's a woman, just one woman. And in the break-in conversation, as Jesus is sort of, dialoguing with people and explaining things of life and things of God and things of His kingdom, one of the religious leaders raises his hand and he says, teacher, rabbi, tongue-in-cheek, right? We have a woman here who's been caught in the act of adultery. And the law says, and this was the law, that she should be stoned to death because of her behavior. What do you say about that, O wise teacher? And the Scriptures actually tell us that they asked Jesus this question for the specific purpose of trying to trap Him, trick Him. And so Jesus, He says, first of all, the first thing He does is really interesting. The Bible says that Jesus bends over and He starts writing in the dirt. So they ask Him this very penetrating question about this woman. Can you imagine how mortified this woman feels? One, she faces the very real threat of being stoned to death, and now she's being publicly humiliated before all these people. And Jesus, He doesn't even respond to it directly. He just sort of bends over and He just starts writing in the dirt. And you got to know that at that point, if you're like in the religious leader crowd, they're probably like whispering to each other like, we got him. That was a great question. We stumped him. He's getting ready to embarrass himself. And when he does, we can pick him up, throw him in jail, and his cause is over. Good work. Then Jesus raises his head back up and he says, here's what I have to say about that. You're right. Your law says that she should be stoned to death because of her sin. Let's just take a different perspective on that law. And here's the perspective I'd like to offer. The one person of you, O righteous, O religious, O perfect group of men, that is without sin, you pick up the stone first and throw it at her. At that point, in the back row where all the religious leaders are, there's a lot of kicking in the dirt. There's a lot of looking down. And the Bible says that one by one they began to leave, starting with the oldest to the youngest. Amazing how much age can sometimes give us awareness into our own frailty and our own brokenness. But one by one they start to leave. Until finally the only one that's left is the woman that was being accused of this horrible crime that was punishable by death. And so Jesus then says to her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" And she says, "No, Lord, none of the accusers are still here to condemn me." And then I love this part. This is such one of the amazing things about Jesus. Neither do I. Go and don't sin anymore. That's awesome, isn't it? What if Jesus dealt with us like that? Where are your accusers? You know that deep, dark secret that you've been hiding from everybody that creates shame in your life? That you won't tell anybody, that you're just hoping, praying to God that nobody ever finds out about your life? What if everybody found out? And then what if Jesus said, "Hey, look, nobody's accusing you. Guess what? Neither do I. Go and live a good life. Go and do right." The reality is that is the way Jesus responds to us. So, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking out loud, okay? So you guys, you have the right to not engage this, but what if every Sunday from now on, in an attempt to create like radical vulnerability, what if we all just came in and in some form or fashion just made an announcement about our shame when we walked in? Morning, everybody. I'm a liar. Morning, everybody. I got drunk last night, but I'm here in church today. Love you guys. Please love me back. Morning, everybody. I really hate myself. I do not feel good about who I am. Please love me. I love you guys. Or what if we just when we came in, we had if you guys don't want to do that, what if we had these rows of name badges? And you just whatever you wore that week that needed to be thrown out there, you just picked up the name badge and slapped it on and just walked in big as Dallas, as we'd say in Texas. Oh, you're conniving. You are gossip. God, you have a temper. It'd kind of be liberating, wouldn't it? I mean, it's scary, it's intimidating, but it would kind of be liberating. I don't know. We'll pray about that this week, and we'll let you know how that one goes out. All right. Hey, here's a couple responses when we experience shame. And we all, when we experience that emotional wash that says, "Oh my gosh, I hope they don't find out," we tend to respond in one of three ways, and sometimes it may be any or all three ways, depending on the situation. Most of us have a dominant response, but here's our responses when we experience shame. Some of us, we move away. So when shame makes itself known, when the fear of being exposed for who we really are presents itself, our tendency is to withdraw. We make ourselves small. Sometimes we just go into silent mode. Some of you are married to someone, or you know someone, or have a friend that when things get weird in the relationship, their response is this. They withdraw, they become quiet, they put on the silent treatment. All of those, hiding, withdrawing, moving away, being quiet, those are all control mechanisms so that I try to continue to control the situation so that you don't find out about me something I don't want you to know. And some of us we're not like this. We don't move away. Some of us move toward. So when a shame moment comes up, what we do is we step out front and we try to people please. We try to win you back over. Gosh, if they find out I'm this broken, they're not going to like me, so I got to make them like me. So some of us will crack a joke. Sometimes I do that. I'm like, oh God, these people are not going to like this. What could I say that would be funny? Right? I remember doing this in school growing up. In school, there's such that awkward thing in social settings, particularly, when you're like 14, 15, 16 years old. And I'm not kidding you guys. I was the funniest kid in my class. Still the funniest person in church, but I was the funniest kid in my class. See, I just did it, didn't I? I just did it. I moved toward you. You laughed. Now we like each other. Well, I like you. All right, so seeking approval, that's one of the things we do. We people please. And if I can just get you to like me, then on the off chance that you do find out about my brokenness, maybe you'll still like me enough to still like me. So we move towards. Some of us, though, we don't move away, we don't move towards, we move against. And so what we try to do is we puff up. We get aggressive. Somebody fires an email at you and you just immediately go, oh my God, I got to respond to this. Send. Oh no, what did I just do? Right? My grandmother in southwest Oklahoma, when we were growing up, she used to have peacocks. And the male peacocks, I don't know if you know this, but they're the ones with the big fan tails. They're the ones with all the beauty in the tail, right? And when the male peacocks would be threatened, that's what they would do. Tail comes out. It's like, do not mess with me. I will tail you. Don't do it. I'm big. I'm bad. If you mess with me, I'm going to tail you. Right? Some of us do that, right? We get threatened, our fear of shame is almost exposed, and so we just puff up. You want some of this? Right? Yeah, tough guy, exactly. Sometimes I do that with my wife. It does not work. I've figured that one out. All right, so we got to wrap up. But here's, if you want to kickstart your shame therapy, where we begin to uncover some things about ourselves and reveal some things so we can actually deal with it instead of just keeping it stuffed down and going, oh yeah, I got shame. Let's really start dealing with it. So here's a couple questions I want you to ask yourself. When shame triggers in you, one of these responses, here's what I want you to just begin to ask. What do you do when you're backed into the shame corner? What's your response? You puff up? You get aggressive? Guess what? That's shame. You withdraw, you get small, become afraid. That's shame. So when you feel those things, when you see those behaviors in yourself, recognize it as shame. Oh, that's shame. Huh. Because it's not till we recognize it as for what it is that we can even begin to deal with it. It's awareness. Oh, wow, look at me. I'm all tucked back in the corner, hoping they don't ask me any more questions. That's shame. I'm over here trying to pass everything off, cracking jokes and trying to look smart, and oh, that's shame. That's shame. Wow. So then what do we do? Well, how do you protect yourself? The second question to ask, how do you protect yourself when you feel threatened, when you feel like you're about to be exposed, when somebody's getting ready to understand your story at a level you don't want them to understand your story? You're not ready to throw it out. How do you protect yourself? This week I was in a little market down in Phoenix. I was grabbing some breakfast, and I was standing in line, and this girl came over, and there's this open case right next to me. The line's about 5 or 6 people deep, and there's this open case right next to me of all these little containers of yogurt and granola. And she comes over, this girl that works there, she comes over and she gets in the case and she starts stacking them up. She's going to take them, over to the other register or something like that. And I've got one in my hand, and I've got my phone in my hand. I'm, doing what we do when we stand in line, like not make any eye contact because it might expose our shame. So I just, I've got my head down and got my yogurt in my hand. And she comes walking through, grabs like a whole bunch of those things, turns around, comes back through the line. She slips on something slick. I have never seen anybody's feet go higher than their head that high. I mean, feet were up in the air. She's coming down. It's all a Matrix moment. It's all in slow motion. I'm like, oh, wow, how's this going to turn out? I hope she's going to be okay. And about the time I said to myself in that millisecond, I hope she's going to be okay, I felt this excruciatingly sharp pain right on the top of my foot, shooting all the way up through my leg, all the way up to my head, where it finally convinced my brain, you should really let out a scream, but not like a girl. So I did. About the time she crashes down to the ground, granola goes everywhere, yogurt's everywhere, it's all sloshing everywhere. And I seriously, it hurt so bad, I'm thinking, I think I broke my foot. I think she broke my foot. She landed with the point of her elbow right on top of my foot. And so there obviously is the next couple of moments of just complete chaos, right? She's scrambling, she's trying to get up, and there's yogurt everywhere, and we don't want more people to slip. And I'm like, gosh, that's a waste of good granola. What should we do with it? And and so I'm trying to help her clean everything up, and it's just this massive chaos moment. And then she says to me, I'm gonna buy your breakfast. I'm like, no, you're not gonna buy my breakfast. Don't worry about it. Could you buy me a cast for my foot? But don't worry about it. You're not gonna buy my. No, I want to buy your breakfast. I'm like, no, it's not necessary, really. I promise. It's an accident. Don't worry about it. I'm not gonna, sue. Nothing. It's just, come on, let's just let it be. So this girl goes back in the kitchen. She tells everybody, that guy back there with the broken foot, we're going to buy his breakfast because I crushed him. And so I get to the front. They pay for my yogurt, my coffee, and it was really nice of them. And then this girl, for the next 45 minutes that I'm in the restaurant, I never saw her again. I think she died. I think she died somewhere inside. I think she was so, mortified. Right? Because after I paid for my stuff, I'm walking around the corner, and I can see her coming to me. We're gonna have an exchange. Our eyeballs are going to meet, and I'm going to greet her again, and I'm going to go, it's okay, don't worry about it. She turns and walks the other way, walks completely around me so she doesn't have to encounter me. What is that? Shame. I don't know where her story is. I don't know if somebody, somewhere along the line, she's a real tall girl. I don't know if somebody said to her, you are so stinking clumsy. And that tape plays over and over in her head so that every single time she has a moment where shame pops out, her tendency is to protect herself, and the way she does it is by walling herself off, disconnecting. So how do you protect yourself? When shame comes out, what comes out of you? What do you do? Is it claws, or do you withdraw? Here's the third question I want you to ask yourself. Who do you call to work through your shame response? Again, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I don't recommend that if you have a shame story that needs to be told, that you come up here on Sunday and tell your story to everybody. I don't recommend that. What I do recommend is that you find one person or two people that you trust with your story, that are going to be honest with you, that are not going to condemn you, that are not going to let you off the hook, that are going to call you on your stuff. If you don't have somebody like that in your life, you need to get somebody like that in your life. And the first step for a lot of us is actually getting a therapist, a counselor, somebody that we really can work through some of the issues of our life with. So who do you call? Who's your first call when you recognize you're shrinking back? Or who's your first call when you recognize the claws came out and you blew it? I hope you have somebody like that in your life. And then here's the fourth question. What's the most courageous thing that you can do for yourself when you feel small, when you feel unworthy, and when you feel hurt? What's the most courageous thing you can do for yourself? Here's one of the things that I do for myself. When I'm feeling shame, when I'm feeling this overwhelming sense of unworthiness of people's love and belonging, I go to a passage of Scripture that is very, very powerful for us. Look at this with me, and I want you to really, maybe you even want to write this down somewhere. This is Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. It's a verse that I pull out sometimes when I'm feeling unworthy, unlovable, when I'm feeling like I don't belong. I pull back and I analyze it. Why am I feeling that way? Well, that's not true. Well, that's not true. You know why? Because here's truth. There's no condemnation for me. People may criticize me. They may not like me. But Jesus doesn't condemn. So, kickstart on our shame therapy today. Some great questions for all of us to ask. And I hope today you walk away with something that allows you to become more open with yourself and hopefully more vulnerable with your life so that true belonging, true love can take place. Let's pray.